Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Gameweek 11 transfer plans. We've just had a lovely game week here. I got 84 points. Now, clearly, Everton and Sunderland, that's still going to be a match to be played. I think obviously that match is actually at home for Sunderland, but I think the main impacts there would probably be some lower Mukiele ownership, Tarkowski and Njai for sure, but hopefully this is going to be a green arrow, right? I'm not envisioning something like a Van de Ven type scenario. Neither does the ownership of any of the players within those teams really impact the rank too much. So I think it's just a positive overall that we've gotten a green arrow. We were able to roll and able to extract a clean sheet from Virgil van Dijk, which I think is quite impressive. But maybe that just speaks more towards the way that Aston Villa played versus Liverpool than compared to some of the other teams within the Premier League. I thought it'd be just good to sort of recap where I feel about my team, and then we can jump into me discussing the fixtures, because I actually, even though with the time zone difference, I actually was able to watch most of the games. The only problem is actually the classic sort of deadline stream, right? Where fortunately, because of the 3 p.m. games being the first games on Saturday, I actually got up at a reasonable time to do the deadline stream as I'm still recording on vacation here in Colombia. And yeah, that's pretty much how I feel about the weekend. Super positive. Let's just jump into the team and how I feel about the players. Raya and Gabriel, I kind of wanted to start on this, right? Because a lot of people actually did go for Gabriel captaincy, so congratulations for the people who did. Unfortunately, of course, Haaland just barely outscored him by 1 point. So I think for the people who actually went for the Gabriel captaincy, of course, you went for a risk, and to come out of it with just -1 points, I don't think it hurts your rank, but it's just about that opportunity cost when you sometimes take an extremely risky decision going against someone who's going to be 180% owned. I know you want the outcome to be a lot better, so I felt like that was a bit unfortunate for those people. But at the same time, a lot of people went for some more rogue captaincies too. Like if you see my vice captain, I went for Saka. I was actually considering it on the live stream as well. And I'm sure someone can say that I was stupid, but I still think Saka, for example, had plenty of chances. And going back to that discussion that a lot of people are having, which is over Raya and Gabriel, I think that the argument is a little bit overblown. At the end of the day, Timber is better than Raya. I think anyone can accept that. But at the same time, Raya is also better than most goalkeepers outside of maybe Ropes right now for Sunderland. I mean, he could actually be, FPL aside, potentially the best goalkeeper transfer of the summer across the big five European leagues, just because of how many points he's actually saved Sunderland this season with some of the saves that he's made. Like, for example, the Nottingham Forest game, a good example of that too. As far as that Timber argument, though, my main thing and the reason why I think it's overblown is at the end of the day, most of the Arsenal points from a defender come from clean sheet expectations. Those expectations have been, stratospheric because Arsenal have become really one of the most tremendous defensive teams that we've ever seen in the Premier League. I think that's not even an overstatement. So when you're actually making the argument about Raya versus Timber, I think, yes, of course, Timber has slightly more ceiling, and we can all appreciate that. But the large majority of points do come from the same source. And that's why, to an extent, even triple defense is doing better, because if you're backing an Arsenal clean every single week, it doesn't hurt to actually go triple Arsenal. It doesn't hurt to go double Arsenal defense. And I guess tangentially, I do benefit as a Saka owner, as someone who's moved towards Saka, because I do get the 1 point. But obviously, 4 points are better than one. And Saka's just not doing anything else right now, even though he's had the chances, which I think is a positive compared to if you look at Saka open play this season up until this game. The big thing for me is, and the positive with this Burnley game, although it is probably the best game that he's going to have in a while, is that he actually got those chances. And he's had some chances within the Champions League matches, but the key thing here is that we're starting to see something, a glimmer of something from Saka. And what I will say is that Gyökeres was fantastic within this game. It seems like he has something muscular, and we just need to monitor that situation for anyone who owns Gyökeres. But the reality is he could have had 2 more assists because he was the one producing the Saka chances. And I just thought overall he had a wonderful game where he was beating his man. Hold up play was excellent, as it has been recently, but he was at least getting himself into types of positions where he can be almost that creator for Saka, or of course within the set piece, put himself there for a tap. And I don't think there's a need to necessarily overreact to Gabriel. I don't see this as some sort of indication that we should be captaining Gabriel going forwards. I think he's one of the best picks in the game, alongside any Arsenal asset, really. And that's pretty much just a reflection of how dominant Arsenal have been. I think going back to the point with Raya, I'm very happy to own him in a week where a lot of the clean sheets are uncertain, and there's just such a gap between the quality of teams. When you look at, for example, a team like Newcastle, and even some of the other teams who've actually gotten really good expected goals conceded numbers, I think the key difference within a team like Newcastle and a team like Arsenal is you can trust Arsenal because of the baselines from previous seasons. Whereas I think when Newcastle have tougher games, I'm expecting those baselines to go a little bit towards the wayside. The context for Arsenal is that they've actually had most of the tougher games of the season already played. and the defensive numbers still look absolutely elite. So that's kind of the argument that I wanted to put out there. Do I want to move towards Timber potentially in the future? I think absolutely. If I can rack up 3 free transfers in the future, I can see myself going towards triple Arsenal defense. But I think for now I'm going to persist with Saka, and I wasn't dismayed by what I saw within the match versus Burnley, which is the key thing. For Virgil, we got a clean sheet from him. The key thing with someone like Virgil when we actually look at fixtures is I think you just have to give Virgil the benefit of the doubt. When you have fixtures like this in the distance and Leeds away is kind of clipped from here. But I mean, if I just almost look at the fixtures here, I think arguably Liverpool have one of the nicer runs of games when it comes to being able to get clean sheets. And if Virgil is still as good a def conner as he has been so far, didn't get the def con versus Aston Villa, and I think that really comes down to how Villa played versus Liverpool. But that for me is an indication of what Virgil can sort of produce over a consistent run of games and why I actually went for Virgil in the first place. I feel like he, at this point, almost is a reluctant hold for me in much the same sense that Saka is in the short term, where I feel like I don't really need to force moves within my team. I'm quite happy with it as it stands. I've been quite aggressive as of late. I don't think I need to be even more aggressive. And just a positive that Liverpool were able to get it clean, as I said. As far as Lacroix, nice to see him get Defcon and over Richards. I have been whining a lot about Defcon and Lacroix and his ability or inability, I suppose, to outscore someone like Mark Guehi. Mark Guehi, I think, still got 2 bonus points within the match. And Guehi has just been absolutely incredible this season. I don't think I've seen a player more dominant in terms of set pieces and just actions across the field, really. So is there an opportunity for me to move Lacroix? Yes, but that is, once again, 100% luxury. I think the huge pro with this week was actually Anderson being fit and ready for the game versus Wolves at home, which was a bit of a surprise. And I think the only thing that I'll mention is that before the press conferences were sort of broadcasted, I believe we got some news about how Anderson was within contention. I think it also speaks towards the importance of actually just listening to what managers have to say, because some of the journalists that I was reading were sort of saying that he was in contention, whereas Marco Silva clearly said that he was definitely going to be in. And probably you can take into that context, understanding that it probably meant definitely in contention. But I think just the positiveness of the tone from Marco Silva just indicated to me that he was going to start. So that's why I started Anderson. For me, that's I think sometimes the importance of actually listening to what a manager has to say and then actually reacting towards that within your FPL team. Although I think most people would have just started Anderson versus Wolves at home anyways, just expecting that he wouldn't be need to called upon from the bench, right? If there was a circumstance where he didn't start the match. In the midfield, I think the interesting argument that people have been having lately is, do you need can you consider benching Semenyo? Can you consider wildcarding without Semenyo? So when I created the wildcard video for this week for Gameweek 10, a lot of people were sort of upset about the idea that I broached, going no Semenyo for 2 weeks at the very bare minimum because the Bournemouth games weren't very good on paper. And I think when I look at my own team, did it make sense to play Semenyo? Yes, because at the end of the day, he's a penalty taker. He's probably better than Dewsbury Hall. Regardless, Sunderland are a very good team. It's an away match for Everton. So there's enough justification for me to go for Semenyo. But some people have better teams than myself for this week. And of course, I was probably fortunate to get the amount of points that I got. But I can understand people starting players over Semenyo this week. And I can even more so understand why people would have wildcarded without Semenyo, because I would have recommended doing that myself. I think one thing we just need to appreciate is, yes, of course, Semenyo has been one of the most impressive mids within the game, but fixtures are fixtures. And also, I think underlyings are also true towards what a player can reasonably get within every match. Now, you can't just expect for someone to completely change the paradigm in terms of the quality of the finishing. And I think even within tougher games, you just have to expect that that's less chances for Semenyo to overperform his finishing, just simply because of the reduction of those chances anyways in the first place. So all that to say, if I had more free chances, I probably would have considered something like Semenyo out. But because I'm also so invested into Semenyo, I think I've gotten at least probably 7 or 8 price rises from him. It does feel hard to move someone like Semenyo out of my team. I think in a week and a half's time, I'll want to have Semenyo in my team. So that's why I've not done it. But I think that does contrast from circumstances where you're wildcarding. And all I wanted to say is that sometimes in FPL, you can go without a highly owned player, just recognizing that I think it's a good bet if you have the risk tolerance. But that's just something there. With Bruno, it's nice to see him doing well. It was actually a very quiet match for Bruno, so not one of those typical circumstances where he was very involved within a match and actually got bonus points. He actually got assists in previous games, for example, like in the Liverpool game, and then he got bonus. But here in this match versus Nottingham Forest, I think Forest were actually quite dominant versus United, which meant that obviously Bruno didn't have much of a chance to actually get into the bonus this game. If anything, Mbemo probably had much better chances himself through, some of the opportunities that he was involved with, and he got nothing. And that just shows you sometimes from an FPL perspective, no need to overreact, in my opinion, between certain picks. I still hold Bruno and Mbemo really highly. That's why I recommended them with my TikTok video last week. But There's going to be weeks where Bruno does better. There's going to be weeks where Mbemo does better. And maybe the argument or the answer is to have both at certain times. Right now, of course, my bet is, with Saka, and let's just see how that goes. With Enzo, a dismaying performance in the sense that he got a blank, but I think he was once again involved in a lot of chances. And then the next match is Wolves at home. Now, it's a bit unfortunate that Wolves have also parted ways with Vitor Pereira, so they sacked him, I believe, earlier today. And it doesn't seem like the manager candidates to replace him are really positive. I think that this is still a great fixture to target. And to be quite honest, as someone who's not very invested into Chelsea, I mean, there's an opportunity to move into more Chelsea players from other managers that I would certainly consider. But for my own personal team context, I'm not sure if I'm going to invest more into Chelsea because I've kind of cognizantly made the move to go into Krupi Jr. It's nice actually that he played 60 minutes versus Man City. That's kind of what we've been seeing as of late from him, regardless of whether Evan Nilsson was out. I feel like Evan Nilsson could start the next match, which is obviously not going to be a positive for Krupi Jr., but I'm holding out for some hope that maybe he'll be available for a match and maybe even start potentially versus West Ham at home. Because if that actually happens, I think then I would be very ahead of the curve, or at least it's just going to be a great game where I can field a certain player, and I'd love to have that opportunity. Mateta and Holland, I think, were fantastic. João Pedro, if I want to put his name out there, I mean, he had a great game, one of the better games that he's had so far. I'm sure a lot of people have sort of reacted to the shots on target, the XG that he got. Clearly, of course, a stark contrast to a lot of the previous games, but at the same time, I think it just goes back to Tottenham and how poor they've been as of late. And I think now it's almost seeping into the defense as well, because it's like the quality of the defense is almost shouldering a lot of the positives for the team because there's nothing really going within attack, and you're relying very much on Vicario performances and defenders outperforming as well. And that's not really sustainable. Plus, the Tottenham fixture run gets worse from here, as we sort of indicated within our videos. Dewsbury Hall, I think maybe one thing I could have mentioned, and I did actually suggest this within the live stream, was actually I probably could have actually considered playing him over Semenyo, but maybe I'm a little bit jaded from last season. I've talked about this in the past, where because I made so many moves that were quite aggressive against the rest of the field, that didn't really work out for myself. I mean, maybe I should just take the logic that if I do truly think my team's better than most players, I probably shouldn't take as many risks with effective ownership, just because it can lead me to sort of seasons where, of course, the rank performance is very kind of sporadic or looks sporadic, because I'm taking so many risks against the field. So I feel like I've become a little bit jaded, if I can be completely honest. I do still like taking risks. I do still like going for the players that I want to go for. I do still like making early transfers. That's my personal play style. But yeah, maybe I could have given it a bit more consideration to that. Now, obviously, I don't know what's going to happen with the Everton versus Sunderland game, but it's nice to just at least have a piece there in Dewsbury Hall who has some value at 4.9. Although I think in the cheat sheet, we actually have some interesting options going forwards who could be even better for cheaper, as long as you're looking for someone who's actually that cheap. But yeah, I think I'm really happy with my team as it stands. It probably actually indicates that I'm more rolling, or the only thing I could be unhappy about is maybe how I have assorted currently my Arsenal triple up, right? And if I go towards triple defense in the future, I think that very much indicates that I'll move the Saka funds within two midfielders. So whoever is holding that Saka spot right now, the Dewsbury Hall spot, and then of course one defender will have to go. Unlikely that that's going to be Senesi, just because Senesi's run of games is going to get really, really good soon. So maybe it's actually a look towards someone like Lacroix in the future, where he can just drop out of my team potentially, even though Palace's run of games are really good, because I still have an Anderson, I still have a Virgil, for example. So that's kind of my thoughts in terms of my team. I'm very happy, very fortunate with the position that I'm in. In terms of fixtures, how I would sort of react to that myself. I think the Brighton game and the Leeds game is an interesting game, because the context of the season for Leeds has been that they've been a really impressive defense. So a lot of people will probably say, of course, our expectations for Leeds should vastly improve. And I think this is an interesting game, because this is a Leeds away game where for the first time they conceded a massive amount of chances outside of the Arsenal game. That's actually like non-penalty creating chances. And going forwards, it's a question to be asked when Leeds actually continue to go through this really tough fixture run, how exactly we're going to respond or rate them as a team. So I think the beauty of using models sometimes is that you can be a little bit behind the curve in terms of looking at the results of the Premier League season, whilst understanding that actually the results so far for the Premier League season don't really indicate our future, a good average expectation for future returns. So what I'm saying by this is, even though Leeds and Sunderland have been super impressive, we still need to make sure that we're not overreacting to every single week, for example, slight changes in terms of where teams are ranked in terms of expected goals conceded. That's why models, I think, are quite helpful sometimes, just to make sure that you can actually level set in a certain way. But yeah, this was a really poor Leeds performance and a really good Brighton performance in contrast. And I think That goes against the narrative that Brighton have struggled versus weaker teams as of late. Maybe it depends on whether you think Leeds is a weaker team, but a positive performance all the same with Brighton. And of course, it opens the door for a lot of managers to now consider Welbeck and of course, Minte, who I've been raving about for a long time. With Burnley and Arsenal, I think that was a very impressive Rice game. Did he have a ton of chances? No. But is he a masterful set piece taker? Yes. I've noticed even, for example, when Saka took a set piece, that he was actually part of an intricate routine. So it wasn't necessarily Saka whipping the ball towards the back post, but instead, actually Saka being part of almost like a 3-4 pass routine, which ended up being someone else crossing the ball into the box instead of someone like Saka. So maybe actually we just need to kind of monitor that situation. Maybe the paradigm is completely shifted towards Rice's favor. But I still think in terms of open play, you're still expecting players like Eze or Saka to get much better chances. And the likes of Gyökeres, of course, if he's fine, if he's fit to play, because Arteta did say, as I said, that there is something muscular. As far as, let's say, this Arsenal team going forwards, I think the only argument is, how you approach triple Arsenal. I don't really see, even though the fixtures do get slightly worse for Arsenal, why you'd want to really move off of it. But there's not much else to be said there. With Crystal Palace, I feel like this was an interesting game because this was actually Crystal Palace almost beating Brentford at their own game. They set pieced Brentford 2-0 and won the game. But it also shows you that this Crystal Palace team is extremely well rounded, that they have set piece threat. Someone like Mateta and Guehi have been fantastic this season in terms of being set piece threats consistently all season round. At the same time, I think all their kind of numbers, whether it's defensive and attacking, have just been really solid. Of course, the attacking leads the way for Palace this season, but it's nice to see them have a little bit more of a controlled performance where they can also win the game through game state, through set pieces. With Fulham versus Wolves, I think unfortunately, that's an indication of just where Wolves are at. I think they had 9 changes to their starting lineup, and then a red card happened. So there's not much to really be said there. With Forest and Man United, that's an interesting game because I do think Forest actually have a lot of quality within the match, and probably were still better on average versus Man United over the course of the 90 minutes. Man United fought their way back to getting a point. But I think Forest is going to be an impressive team going forward. My only concern is that the way that the players were priced for Nottingham Forest this season is that they're a little bit too high, in my opinion. If someone like Murillo or Milenkovic is at the price that they're at, I think you just still have much more value at teams who are actually still top half teams at the end of the day, who are cheaper. And that goes back to things like the Palace players that we've mentioned, or even an Anderson within that context for Fulham, even though so far they haven't been a top half team. With Spurs, we've talked about their declining run. I almost opened with a preamble about Spurs. I just haven't been impressed whatsoever from the team, even though the defensive numbers have been okay. The attacking numbers have definitely fallen off a cliff, and that's why you're seeing players like Xabi leave the cheat sheet, or even Kudus drop, his sort of tier. At the same time, I think the defense is starting to slip a little bit, and I'm not going to overreact to silly things like maybe the Spence and Van de Ven thing, which has been sort of put around football Twitter, but it's not a positive sort of spark, I suppose, around Spurs at the moment. So it's something to monitor. With Liverpool, it was sort of going back to winning ways, but I think the question is, if they continue to still struggle with long balls, if a team actually continues to challenge them with long balls, I mean, how do Liverpool react going forwards? I think it's nice that we're starting to see more Wirtz being benched, more Sobo playing almost the full extent of the game at center mid, and Bradley, I think, building on his performances as well, being fit to play right back for 90 minutes. These are all positives for Liverpool, so let's just see how they build upon that. With West Ham versus Newcastle, I think I was just appalled at Newcastle. And at the same time, I had criticized West Ham for the last 2 matches with Nuno's sort of setup with playing Souček and Irving. Not a surprise when you play Mateus Fernandes and also, Freddie Potts, that you have a much more vibrant midfield and a much more serious midfield. But they were able to play, and Newcastle almost allowed them to play. And the Newcastle substitutions were shocking, right? When we react to this, I think the biggest takeaway from this is the Waltermat early substitution, the Gordon early substitution. These are both players who are clearly going to fall down the pecking order within my cheat sheet. And Gordon just hasn't been super productive at all for his price point, despite the sort of penalties being bestowed towards him. And then with Waltermat being an early substitution, even whilst Weiss is not there, it's just an indication of actually the strength, I guess, or how well maybe Osula is actually rated right now amongst the team, amongst the management. With West Ham, I think Freddie Potts is actually a very interesting price point. Let's see how many matches he can sort of build upon. Now, the next few games for West Ham are really poor. So you're going to get a Burnley at home. But after that, the fixture run's really mediocre. But actually, I think Freddie Potts could be a better 4.4, 4.5 type mid than anyone else in the game, including Josh King. And that's mostly because he can get you value from DEFCONs, because it seems like that's likely what he's going to do for this team. Elsewhere, I would say Paquetá is still great. I still don't think Bowen's great value, though, is the only thing I'll say. He definitely deserved an assist. I thought that was very bogus, so definitely unfortunate for Bowen owners, but that's sometimes FPL for you when they want to make the decisions that they want to do. But with City and Bournemouth, there's not much to overreact there. I think I made a tweet about how I thought people were overreacting a little bit towards historical numbers from Holland versus Bournemouth. I think I'm not someone who really subscribes to your head-to-heads, your XG versus previous opponents within very different games where you're playing with a different team, they're playing with a different team. I mean, how much has Bournemouth changed over the last 2 years? How much has City changed over the last 2 years? How much has Holland improved this season? Or how much has City improved in being able to sort of facilitate Holland this season? Like, these are things I feel like we don't take into account when we just purely look at historics. And that's why I think still looking at odds, looking at models and their projections are helpful to just to balance and level set your opinions. Not to mention, I made the argument that Mateta was actually someone who blanked 5 games in a row versus Bournemouth and then scored versus them with a hat trick and got 3.48 XG. I mean, Holland didn't get exactly quite the same, but he had plenty of chances himself and some very easy chances for the quality of Holland as a player as he is in terms of the 101s as a striker. So that's sort of my recap of the week. I think even though Sunderland Everton, I think is an extremely FPL relevant game because of the ownership of the Sunderland defenders increasing week to week, and of course even Dewsbury Hall and Njai being quite popular, as well as Jack Grealish. The only thing I would say is that I'm not keen on the Everton fixtures going forwards. Neither do I think after this game do Sunderland have the great games. I think this is actually a really good Sunderland game, and after that, it becomes a bit worse. So for me, when I'm looking ahead as a manager, I'm just saying that I'm not looking at players from these two teams with an extremely sort of keen eye, just because I don't think the fixture runs really dictate that anyone's going to be too interesting from these teams going forwards. But a very interesting week of Premier League football. And I think the one takeaway that I have is that I feel like this season I almost have a huge change and shift in terms of expectations compared to my preseason on how teams have performed. Like, I think Spurs, Newcastle have definitely fallen off sort of my estimation. Whereas obviously some teams have actually become even more impressive, right? Like, somehow Arsenal are still better than what I expected, even though I thought they were a fantastic team last year anyways. And then Bournemouth and Crystal Palace have also been huge improvers, as we've basically said within every sort of piece of content week to week. But yeah, if there's anything I can probably say, I think a really good force performance. So maybe they're a team that we can look towards with slightly keen eye in the future, just because they're a team that look competent now. And that's all I'll say. Let's just jump into my transfer plans this week, and we can kind of see how I'm planning to line things up, if I plan to be a bit more aggressive or just a bit more passive as we head towards Game Week 12/13. So we're back here with the Fantasy Football Hub My Team Pick and Rating tool. You can actually access the My Team Pick and Rating tool yourself within the link in the description below. I tend to use it every week, as you guys can see within the transfer plans, just to sense check what my potential moves are, how almost the algorithm sort of computes my team per week. And yeah, I think inversely almost it provides me with like a window where I can see, okay, this is where my team is weak. This is what I need to fix for. This is potentially a free hit window. Because when I was doing my transfer plans last week, I didn't actually think Palace would beat Liverpool within the FL Cup. But then Liverpool, of course, fielded a really weak team and Palace completely decimated them. Then, of course, the BBC journalist Dale Johnson had effectively mentioned that he still doesn't see a chance for the Premier League to actually reschedule the games such that it creates a blank game week, double game week type scenario for 17 and 16 respectively. So right now, I think it makes sense to operate with the assumption that probably there's a 90% probability that we won't have blanks and doubles for the first half of the season, which means we go back to that thought of, okay, when are you get a free hit? And possibly, as I said, the free hit scenario is most likely when Arsenal has a poor game, and maybe when we don't want triple Arsenal on a specific game week, or there's a lot of differentials. And I think game week 13 is still the one that fits the bill for my sort of team structure. But if we go for game week 11, I've optimized the team now, and I actually think it's in a good spot because Anderson's back. Everton away, I think, actually is a pretty good game. Everton are still, I would say, tilted towards being, a slightly weaker offensive team, even though they've improved on the offense this season and just generally as a team so far. I don't know whether I'll change my opinions after the Sunderland match. Maybe there'll be heroics from Njai, or maybe Beto scores a chance from Njai for once. But, we can react to that, and I still think Anderson's the play. It is a mirror matchup, right? So it's effectively me saying I want to play Anderson over Dewsbury Hall. And this is the week where I bench Virgil. But going back to the point that I sort of made, I feel very comfortable playing Senesi. I feel very comfortable playing a lot of the defenders that I have because they're really good at defensive contributions. And very often that almost outscores like what a budget mid would do as an expectation every single week, considering that you actually have that additional advantage of having clean sheet odds, right? Clean sheet odds are very much like if you wanted to compare that to, the chances of someone getting an assist plus a goal or a goal anytime. I actually think that a lot of defenders tend to trump the sort of more cheaper mids within the game. Now, some of the cheaper defensive mids within the game have just been absolutely amazing, like Gravenberch scoring goals, Caicedo scoring goals, even assisting as well within the Tottenham game. But I tend to think in underlying stats and still probably trying to rely on actually. I think having a strong core of defense is probably still what I want to do and have going forwards. However, in Game Week 12, as I said, I think that's a window where this is actually, once again, a really good team that I have. But the question is going to be, can the team get better? I feel like I don't really make a move on 12 in this circumstance. I make a move on 13. Now, 13 is going to be that window where either I free hit here, so this is 13, or I actually simply make free transfers. What can I make free transfers for? I think this is the window where I probably actually just split Saka up into two midfielders. And the ones that I'm targeting right now would actually be Sobo, 100%. And then I'd go out of Dewsbury Hall. So for Dewsbury Hall as a midfield replacement, I think the most logical midfield replacement that I have right now isn't going to be another Arsenal midfielder. It should really just be Minte, who I love. Nottingham Forest away is not a particularly good game. I think we just saw United play that game, and it wasn't a good game. But do I think that I want to go Sar, or do I want to go with someone like Minte and then probably save enough money in the bank so I can upgrade a potential forward in the future? Is almost the way that I'm going around this. I have 3 free transfers in this window, but I feel like the thing that's tricky for me is, do I really know if I want to keep Krupi? Because the interesting thing with Krupi is I would have had, let's say, West Ham at home, potentially as a play opportunity in the previous game week, and then I could reassess, right? So if I make these 2 transfers here, I think this still sets me up with close to a perfect team on this week. But then going forwards, there's always, after this game week, can I move into, let's say, a triple Arsenal defense? And that just means going for Uran Timber. Or do I just simply move Krupi Jr. into a very capable forward? So right now, it could be someone like a Thiago or a Welbeck. And I think Thiago is the one who makes the most sense, right? Just because the fixture is so good. And I can even bench Minte within the circumstance. But that probably means that if I make a move like Thiago, that it actually closes me off in the short term away from, let's say, too much Arsenal, because I still feel like I'm actually going to give Virgil these games here. And that's how it's going to be, because Timber is so expensive now. I can't really move Lacroix into someone like Timber. It always has to be potentially Virgil within my own squad. So something to think about. But I don't think this is like an awful 2 game week window where, or even 3 game week window where it's so bad to have like double Arsenal. Because if you think about it, West Ham away is a good game. Just because even of the set piece argument, I would say Sunderland at home for me is still a good game for Liverpool. Leeds away is still a good game, mostly because all these teams are weak on attack this season, and we've seen it so far. And even though Liverpool have shown that they have a propensity to concede a lot of chances to some of these teams, especially even through set pieces like they did versus Brentford, I just feel like the home and away aspect for the specific teams that they're playing actually does suit the fixture run for Virgil. So something to think about would be just keeping Virgil for a while, and then maybe actually just assessing when Arsenal play Aston Villa away, how I would go back into triple Arsenal coming out of Aston Villa away. Because if you kind of look at the fixtures, this sort of window between Chelsea away and Aston Villa away, fine, I do miss Brentford at home, which is probably going to be a huge game, and I'll probably be super upset about it. But I think having the flexibility to either move into Arsenal or not is there around 13 to 15. I know a lot of people don't really like this sort of ideation, but that really just comes down to, do I make these moves because Saka has just been unimpressive for my team, or simply is it the case where Haaland is such an easy perma, plug and play? I don't need someone like Saka to cover captaincies anymore, or I just have Bruno sometimes because on the poorish weeks I've got Bruno, for example, as cover potentially, and I'm not going to go Salah within the immediate future. So something to think about would be moves kind of like this. But that's it for me in terms of my transfer plans. As I said, I am planning to think about whether I go for a free hit on 13, but it all stems from questions like, how do I feel about Saka? Like, for example, if I was very comfortable with owning Saka over this run, it's more likely that I would actually use a free hit here, because I can just redistribute the funds, go for triple Brentford for 1 week. And then actually, if you kind of look at a team like Brentford, the odd thing with them is they actually have really poor fixtures outside of 13, outside of Leeds at home. Or maybe if you kind of looked at it from a fixture run perspective, if you were to free hit on 13, you could go back into Brentford actually on 16 instead, as opposed to sort of bag holding someone who has really poor fixtures back to back, Arsenal away and Spurs away. And there doesn't seem to be that much immediate value if you're going to use a free hit eventually on one of the game weeks. So that's kind of my thoughts right now in terms of transfer plans. But I think I like the idea that my Game Week 4 wildcard pretty much was this structure with the small moves that I made where I went for Saka and Krupi. Now, as I said within some of my other videos and even with my wildcard video this week, a lot of people are going triple Arsenal defense, and I think that's perfectly fine. If anything, I think if Gyökeres is actually injured for a lot of managers, they're going to make this move, which is going to be Gyökeres towards someone like Mateta or João Pedro, and then actually moving that money and redistributing back into defense. Because instead of owning someone like Virgil, I feel like most people have enough money to actually go for someone like Timber within that Virgil spot that I have within my team. But in my case, I still own triple Arsenal, but hopefully we'll be able to enjoy Virgil within the future. Let's see how things fall, but that's going to be it for my Game Week 11 transfer plans. Let me know what your plans are for this game week. Are you waiting for Gyökeres news? Are you making early transfers? All the best, and I'll see you guys soon.